Sergio Perez. 6-time race winner, 39-time podium finisher. Checo is a driver who's captured the hearts and minds of F1 fans across the globe. With a reputation of a tyre whisperer and the ability to turn a race on its head, he was worthy of a seat at a top team when Red Bull signed him for the 2021 F1 season. Throughout his career, he has shown moments of jaw-dropping brilliance, pulling off podium finishes in cars which should never have been capable of it, and winning races from positions which should have made it impossible. Despite talk of him being replaced mid-season, Red Bull have kept faith with him. So today, I'm going to pick out some of his best moments and remind all of you why Sergio Perez has a Red Bull seat. I'm George, you're watching F1 Reverse, and these are Sergio Perez's greatest ever races. Sergio Perez came into Formula 1 with a lot of promise. In his final season in GP2, what's now known as F2, he finished second in the championship with almost double the points of his teammate at the time. Joining the Sauber team, which finished the previous season 8th out of 12 teams, Checo instantly made an impact in Formula 1. The opening race of the 2011 season was held in Australia, and all eyes were on Red Bull and McLaren to see who would take an early lead in both championships. A hydraulics problem cost Checo lap time, and he could only manage 13th on the grid in qualifying for Sunday's Grand Prix. His teammate Kamui Kobayashi would start the race P9. It being his rookie race, starting 13th, and being in a Sauber, no one expected anything of Perez, but what he did at Sunday's race made everyone pay attention. Every single other driver who finished the 2011 Australian Grand Prix needed 2 pit stops, many of them needed 3. But Sergio Perez would show why he would become known as a tyre whisperer in his very first F1 race. Perez was one of only 2 drivers to start the race on hard tyres, and he did struggle with pace to begin with, but he made those tyres work for him. He stayed out until lap 22 on his original set of tyres, 5 laps longer than any other driver managed on their race starting tyre, rising to 7th place in the process. That wasn't the impressive stint though. He made the soft tyres he fitted at that one singular pit stop last the remaining 35 laps. By nursing those soft tyres far further than they should have been able to go, Perez managed to cross the line in 7th place after a show-stopping debut Grand Prix. David Coulthard and Eddie Jordan declared him driver of the day, and Jordan went as far as saying it was one of the finest debuts he's ever seen. Pirelli's director of motorsport at the time, Paul Hembry, was left speechless by the performance, saying that his team were utterly stunned by what they'd seen. Both Sauber cars would eventually be disqualified when their rear wings failed scrutineering tests after the race, but that took nothing away from Checo's strategy-defying first drive. Perez might be a regular F1 podium finisher nowadays, but that wasn't always the case. He had to wait until 2012 for his first podium, but he did so with a drive which briefly got him into the conversation for a Ferrari seat at Felipe Massa's expense in 2013. Sauber looked racy at the 2012 season opener, and at the second race of the season, they proved they could be a contender. From P9 on the grid and in treacherous conditions, Sergio Perez threw the dice. He was the first driver to switch from intermediate tyres to wets in the opening laps, and it was a call that paid off as he ended up in P3 when the race was halted due to the wet weather on lap 7. After an excellent restart and another round of pit stops, he gained another place and set off in pursuit of leader Fernando Alonso. As the track dried, race leader Fernando Alonso pitted for used mediums on lap 40. A lap later, Perez came in for new hard tyres and the chase was on. Perez showed some incredible pace on what was theoretically the slower tyre to put an incredible amount of pressure on Alonso. Sadly, while less than a second behind Alonso's Ferrari, a trip off track forced the team to tell Checo to take it easy and just settle for second place. Nonetheless, it was still an excellent result, and it was a drive that made him the sport's hottest property and most exciting young talent at the time, igniting widespread calls for a top team to give him a seat. 2012 was still early days in Checo's career, and despite that incredible debut drive, he still hadn't properly earned himself the nickname the Tyre Whisperer. In Canada though, he would pull off one of those tyre-caressing, midfield-charging drives that would become the cornerstone of his career. The Sauber star qualified 15th, and from there, he would have done well just to score points. But this wouldn't be 8 times he shocked the F1 world if he just got to 10th place. Checo pulled off an incredible 41-lap stint on soft tyres to start the race and pitted for super softs from P7. He wasn't done with his tyre whispering though. With 29 laps to go, he nursed his tyres as those ahead pitted, and with less than 10 laps left, he finally went on the attack, passing Fernando Alonso to score an unbelievable second podium of the season. A tough season at McLaren as Lewis Hamilton's replacement saw Perez sent to Force India for the 2014 season. It was a huge disappointment for the promising young driver, but he quickly showed the F1 world he wasn't going to be held back. The 2014 Bahrain Grand Prix is best known as the duel in the desert for the brilliant Rosberg vs Hamilton battle, and one could easily forget Perez's performance. Starting 4th, Perez hounded the Williams of Valtteri Bottas for P3 and then held off teammate Nico Hülkenberg, both Williamses, and at the end of the race the Red Bulls, for Force India's second ever podium. It was a performance worthy of the title of Minister of Defense. But more than a show of talent, this was a show of resilience from Checo. Many leveled heavy criticism at Perez coming into the 2014 season, saying his showing at McLaren proved that he could never be a top driver. But he shrugged all of that off to bounce back in round 3 of the season. Life at a midfield team is never easy. Some weeks you're podium contenders, and others you're lucky to even score a point. It's a life that Perez knows well, and at the 2016 Monaco Grand Prix, he was on top form to make the most of the opportunities. Starting 7th in Monaco meant Checo wasn't expecting a podium on his 6th F1 race in the Principality. Not since 2012 had a driver achieved a podium starting outside the top 3, when Fernando Alonso finished 3rd from 5th on the grid. The increased weight and size of the cars, thanks to the hybrid engines that came in 2014, made it almost impossible to pull off. That wasn't going to stop Sergio Perez though. The race began behind the safety car on the damp Monaco streets, a VSC coming out for Jolyon Palmer's crash at the start. Checo pulled off the overcut on many ahead of him, unsurprisingly going long on his first stint before judging the drying conditions perfectly to execute the undercut later on and move up to P3. With conditions still tricky and Sebastian Vettel all over him, the job was far from done. He couldn't afford a single mistake, and he didn't make one, crossing the line in P3 after a flawless drive. Daniel Ricciardo's pit stop pain may have taken the headlines in the immediate aftermath, but it was Perez's incredible drive that was the highlight of the race. In 2020, Sergio Perez was in his 7th season at the team, which were now called Racing Point. Over those 7 seasons, he'd proved himself to be a valuable member of any midfield team, and with his contract up at the end of the season, his place in Formula 1 was surprisingly at risk. It seemed almost impossible that such a capable driver was out of a drive, but as the silly season progressed, no one was picking Perez for their team. The pressure was on, and Checo knew if he was going to save his F1 career, he needed to make magic happen. It was Perez's teammate Lance Stroll who initially stole the show in Turkey in 2020, the Canadian storming to pole position on a wet and wild weekend at Istanbul Park venue that had returned to the calendar for the COVID-affected season. Lance's 1.47.765 in Q3 was a full 1.5 seconds faster than his 3rd place teammate. Starting 3rd and gaining a place off Verstappen at the start, Perez played his favourite move and managed a mammoth 48-lap stint on intermediate tyres, having pitted from wets on lap 10. He kept his cool when Verstappen approached, and his defence made the Red Bull driver spin off at high speed in an attempted pass for P2. A different strategy saw Lance Stroll completely disappear from the race. With only Hamilton ahead of him, Checo came under incredible pressure from behind him, but despite his unbelievably worn tyres, none could pass him. Charles Leclerc tried to sweep by him and locked up heavily, while Sebastian Vettel finished just 0.32 seconds off the cool, calm and collected Racing Point driver at the flag. It was an incredible drive from Perez in treacherous conditions, but it was one that he would unbelievably better just 2 races later. With just 2 races remaining in the 2020 F1 season, all the talk before the Sakhir Grand Prix was about how Sergio Perez's career was coming to an end. His incredible drive in Turkey had reminded everyone just how good he was, but still no one could find a space for him. Despite the impending end of his F1 career, Checo kept his cool and qualified P5 for the Grand Prix. From there, another podium finish was always a possibility, but after what happened on lap 1, his hopes were completely ruined. After being taken out by Charles Leclerc and needing to pit on the first lap, his chances of even getting a points finish looked almost impossible. However, he quickly got his head down and was back in the top 10 by lap 21, thanks to some excellent pace and some flawless overtaking. Not what he was hoping for, but still an impressive drive after what had happened. However, the racing gods were looking over him that day. Mercedes' ill-fated double-stack pit stop during the second safety car period of the evening jeopardized their chances on lap 62. Race leader George Russell was put on the wrong tyre and Valtteri Bottas was kept on worn tyres. The mistake handed Checo the lead, but Russell was determined to win on his Mercedes debut. And then, disaster struck. Russell had to pit again with a puncture, removing Perez's main rival from the race. It seemed too good to be true, as close calls after near misses seemed to punctuate Perez's 10-year wait for an F1 win. Yet, it was true. The 190-race wait for a victory was over for the Mexican after a miraculous last-to-first comeback. It was the perfect race, the epitome of what Perez was about, and a poetic first-ever win on what was, at the time, his second-to-last F1 race. Of course, he wasn't done just yet. Red Bull and just about everyone else were rightly blown away by that race win and decided to take a chance on Checo for 2021. It paid off as he helped Max Verstappen break Mercedes' dominance of the sport that very season. However, perhaps his most memorable race for Red Bull would come the season after. The 2022 Monaco Grand Prix was the perfect race for Checo. Named the king of the streets by this point, his reputation for performing at his best when Formula 1 left the track and hit the city was well established. Starting from third though behind both Ferrari cars, a race win should have been completely impossible, but not for Sergio Perez. A rolling start on wet tyres began the race, and when the safety car pulled in on lap 3, Charles Leclerc led off from Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen. As the track dried, a flurry of pit stops happened, with teams switching to the intermediates and then to hard tyres. Following a botched Ferrari double stack, Red Bull managed to smoothly get both of the drivers onto slick tyres, and Checo overcut both Ferrari cars, meaning on lap 22 the order was Perez, Sainz, Verstappen and a furious Leclerc in P4. Mick Schumacher's crash caused a red flag, and Red Bull opted for the medium tyre, while Ferrari decided to play the long game and fit the hard. Straight from the restart, Perez showed good pace, but as the medium tyre wore out, the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz started to close. An incredible defensive display followed, with Checo using every ounce of skill to hold off the Spanish driver for an astonishing win in appalling conditions. Perez's margin for victory was just 1.154 seconds over Sainz, Verstappen just 0.33 seconds behind the Spaniard, and Leclerc 2.9 seconds off in P4. It was an incredibly well-earned win, and one Perez will cherish forever. Alright, that was 8 times Sergio Perez shocked me and the F1 world. Which of those races were you most impressed by? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.